travels on his podium says, "Leave no child behind." That's about all he's ever done in Texas, is to leave children behind. Child hunger, child toxic pollution, no child health insurance, the highest percentage. It goes on and on. You know, basically, politicians become expert at perpetuating hoaxes. When you heard George W. Bush yesterday say, "I believe in people. I trust people. I don't trust the federal government," all I could hear him say really was, "I believe in big corporations. I trust big corporations. I don't trust democracy to hold them accountable." You know what George W. Bush is doing? He's a big corporation running for president disguised as a person. Quality of the media in this country, when a man like George W. Bush, who has really turned the state over to the big polluters, the big banks, the big insurance companies, who's gleefully said that he has passed legislation that makes it harder for those of you who are wrongly injured to have your full day in court against the companies whose products or toxics injured you. He has in many ways kept the state down, because he's being financed by the big corporations who have kept this state down for generations. And yet, every day the press quotes his famous statement. He's a compassionate conservative. Now, when I first heard that, I wondered why he had to emphasize the adjective. If he's a compassionate conservative, where does that leave a little old conservative without an adjective? Well, he says he's a compassionate conservative, but if you look at all of these rankings that has placed Texas in the bottom 10% of all the states and 96 out of 150 indicators that cover everything from environment, education, human services, economy, including jobs and income, taxes, consumers, public safety. 96 out of 150. The state is in the bottom 10% of all states. I wonder what he'd be like if he wasn't a compassionate conservative. He is so indentured to big business that he can't even rebut Al Gore. When Al Gore says, and you know, Al Gore is a member of the Democratic Party that's become very good in Washington at electing very bad Republicans that took over the Congress. 90 days. If we can't rely on the Democrats to save us from the extreme wing of the opposing Republican Party, if we can't rely on the Democratic Party to save us and save our Congress from the likes of Tom DeLay and Dick Armey and Newt Gingrich and Fred Lott, what else can we expect from the Democratic Party other than a process of morphine into the Republican Party and becoming one corporate party with two heads wearing different makeup? That's what they are. You know, for 37 years I've been watching, studying, investigating, suing the government and businesses and getting a lot of... What I see now is all those citizen groups, you know, that you send $25 to when they send you a letter in the mail, and they say they're going to fight for you, consumer protection, environment, and peace and arms control and labor, and trying to improve the criminal injustice system and civil rights enforcement and all of that. They're being shut out. They're being closed out by two corrupt parties whose strings are pulled by their financiers. The 9,000 corporate PACs, political action committee PACs, wined and dined by 22,000 corporate lobbyists swarming over Washington day after day, with their networks throughout the country of dealers insurance agents, etc. It's a pretty sad spectacle. When you read about what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson expected our country and our government to be like, when you read about all the valiant efforts in the past of our forebears who put their livelihoods and everything on the line to abolish slavery, give women the right to vote, get trade union rights for workers, all the farmers, and the populist progressive movement, and you can almost hear them. You can almost hear them now, their ghosts, saying to us, are we going to put our arm at the wheel of justice like they did? Are we going to be a generation that can hand this country and this world over to future generations who will look kindly upon our efforts? And will they say, you didn't do anything when you knew you had to do something. You were otherwise preoccupied. You were spending too much time looking at screens. You allowed yourself to be trivialized. You didn't fulfill your potential. You didn't respect posterity. You didn't fulfill your civic obligations. You didn't take the solutions that you had on the shelf in your time period and put them to work in our country. Why didn't you do that? Because we settled for the least worst, the lesser of two evils. Because our expectation levels are too low. Because we don't have an estimate of our significance historically to shape the future of our country and build a strong democracy. That's why. That's where it all comes back to. This election is about a lot of things. It's about two major things. The concentration of power and wealth in too few hands. By the few who decide for the many, they've taken control of our government. It's no big secret. The press reports it all the time. Page 1, Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, 2020. You see it all. That's no secret. It shows you how secure their power is, that they can be exposed again and again and again, and nothing happens. The prosecutors don't swing into action because there are enough of them on corporate crime and fraud and abuse. They're too busy going after people who are caught with small possession and use of marijuana so they can fill it out. By the way, there's a paradox that's escaped the political commentators in recent months. You know that George W. Bush and Al Gore have both admitted that when they were young and irresponsible, to use George W. Bush's word, they violated the drug laws. They've admitted it. Now here in Texas and up in Tennessee, there are people who have been in jail for 5 or 10, 15 years for being caught with small amounts of marijuana or heroin and using it and becoming addicts and getting caught. You know one question we should ask? Why do George W. Bush and Al Gore deserve to be president when these people deserve to rot in prison year after year? Challenging the failed, expensive, hazardous, failed war on drugs. You notice that? They're all avoiding the issue. Just like if you try to dodge the draft, you give the weapons manufacturers all the money they want to build mass weapons of destruction against no known enemies around the world. Where is the major enemy? The Soviet Union, no more. Corporations are piling into communist China, it's becoming capitalist, etc. It's really very strange. Always watch out for people who shirk their duty and then make you pay for it in billions of dollars of diverted tax money that should come back to the neighborhoods and communities. People saying it the way many people who've worked in this area say it, but they don't have any visibility or power. the Republican governor of Mexico said, the former mayor of Baltimore said, even William F. Buckley has said, you do not treat drug addicts as criminals and send them to jail. You treat them as a health problem and try to rehabilitate them. Send alcoholics to jail. That takes 150,000 lives, by the way. We do not send nicotine addicts to jail. Why are we engaging in this medieval carnage and superstition costing $40,000 a year? It's been shown again and again that $1 million spent on rehabilitation much more effective in reducing the incidence of drug addiction than criminalizing it, than militarizing it, than making the helicopter manufacturers who are going bananas on sales to Colombia, South America. That's what's going on here. It's becoming big business. The corporate prisons, the helicopter manufacturers, the equipment manufacturers, the surveillance, the detectives. Our police are being endangered. Our communities are endangered. And tens of billions of dollars are being lost, and it's still not doing anything for the problem. How many innocent people are going to be killed in year after year, or injured, or frightened to sit on their front porches because of this failed war on drugs? How many times are we going to be told the police are being killed by these drug gangs? We've got to deal with this as a health problem. We have community policing where the police work and live in the community. You're not going to get much racial profiling from police who live and work in the community. Everybody knows that. They know what I have. Follow the studies that have shown a rational way out of this mess. I mean, alcoholism, as I said, takes 150,000 lives a year. Tobacco, 420,000 lives. Hard drugs, 5,000 lives. We want to try to wean everybody, if we can, under the rule of law into more wholesome lifestyles, obviously. There's some really good success in the alcoholism area and really good success in the tobacco area. We're now down to 24% of adults smoking when it was 45% in 1965. Just one major subject matter of many that are not discussed by Al Gore, George W. Bush, or the two parties. And there are many others. Let me just list a few. Do you see them really discussing the horrible conditions of hard-working small farmers in our country and what's happening to rural life in America? Because of Cargill and IPP and ADM and Smithfield and the giant agribusiness companies fueled by the so-called Freedom to Farm Act of 1996 and by a lackadaisical attitude of Clinton Gore under the antitrust laws and the Packers and Stockyards Act. And what's going on? That these companies are squeezing the price down 30-40% lower in 1996 for wheat, corn, soybean. Have you seen those prices drop like that in your supermarket? Who's making the windfall? It's Cargill, it's Continental Grain, it's ADM, it's all those companies that sponsor your Sunday talk shows. Not CBS. We have a major program dealing with the preservation of the small farm economy, expanding organic farming, breaking up these giant oligopolies, and you can get a lot of that in terms of a major paper on food policy. Just log into competitivemarkets.com for any further details. The two parties also never talk about corporate crime. Isn't that interesting? That's part of the mindset. That's a part of all of us growing up corporate instead of civic. If I mention the following words to you, what immediately comes to mind? Crime, violence, welfare, regulation. Well, you know, it's poverty, it's street crime, it's war, It's government regulation. But you see, if you look at it just in terms of the evidence, corporations and their criminal negligent behavior steal far more by a long shot from people around the country, the burglars or just street crime. Let me just give you a few examples. Let's start with corporate crime in terms of theft. The General Accounting Office estimates that 10 cents out of every dollar you spend for health care goes down the drain and into the pockets of the vendors because of computerized billing fraud and abuse. Have you ever tried to figure out these computerized bills? Even your telephone, your electric bill, it's all in code, I wonder why they can't make it really clear for you. Why are they developing a special language so you just give up, you just write the check? Because if you try to question it, you say, what does this mean? And I didn't buy it. What is going on here? You got a 1-800 number, so you call it, and you start. Press 1, press 2, press 3. And then our representatives are serving other customers, but your business is very important to us. And then they hit you with the advertisements, and you press 3, and you get another tier, and you get some robot voice. And then they put you on hold, and then they play music or ads. Now, I know this, we all know this, we're losing billions of hours a year, just on hold. On hold. And they talk about customer service. You imagine customers when I'm working late at night, I want to hear classical music, I just dial United Airlines. In one area after another, you've read this. It just doesn't translate into politics, into elections, into political debate. The rip-offs are incredible. They're subtle, they are systemic, and a lot of times you don't feel it. Like you don't feel $110 billion in computer billing fraud and abuse in the healthcare industry, but you pay for it. And you don't feel these things frequently, but sometimes you do. And they're so outrageous that you realize how powerless you are. For example, 3 years ago, Advanta Corporation, which is a credit card company, announced in June that as of July 1st, all customers of Advanta who decide to quit them will be charged $25. They control your money because they debit you. You can't argue with them. When the banks hit you for $30 for a bounce check that costs them $1.50, including covering actual fraud, that's a big profit center. How are you going to fight that, right? The only way you can fight that is to pull out your money and go to another bank. Maybe they charge $29 instead. How about the credit union? The credit union is the opportunity. And the Texas Credit Union League has got all kinds of information. When you get hit like that with all kinds of bank charges and all kinds of penalties, do you know the word penalty used to be reserved for the government? The government penalized. Now the airlines penalize. The credit card companies penalize. The insurance companies penalize. The landlords penalize. And why? Because they're the government. They've got the governmental power over you. I'll give you an example. All of you have signed standard form contracts. You bought insurance, you signed a lease with the landlord, you filled out a bank deposit card, you have had an agreement with an HMO or your employer. There's no end to it. Every day people sign these agreements. Now let me ask you, what do you think would happen to you if you adjusted that agreement? What do you think would happen if you went down to the auto dealer, picked out the car, the auto dealer shuffles all the checks out your credit, sees what your credit score is. We got a number now. See, they score you. It's all in the computer, whirling around the world. All private information. They know more about you than you know about yourself. Because the machine can keep it all together. It has synergy. They know what you buy, when you buy, who you buy it from, your financial information, your personal medical information. They have your credit information. They have who may have sued you, who you have sued. And if you sue too much, then they'll blacklist you. And if you have 3 bounce checks, even though their maneuvers led to it, they send your name to a computer bank out east, and you can't get a checking account because all the banks look you up. See, the big electronic eye. I mean, Orwell just didn't have a big enough imagination. Or did Huxley break the window. And now we're into knowing everything about your genes, your genetic profile, your inclination to be vulnerable in 30, 40 years to this disease or that disease. Will you get insurance? Will you get a job? Will you get this? Will you get that? It's completely out of your control now. It's an electronic database. It's getting worse by the year. They have now data mining companies. That's what they call them, where they develop even closer profiles and details about every little thing that you do. There's no dictatorship in the world who ever knew, or that ever knew anything about their subjects the way these corporations do. That's why a lot of people resent it. It's called invasion of privacy. It should be called invasion of the self. And you should control that personal information. And no one should be able to use it without your permission. Anyway, you pick out a car, your dealer puts all the contract in front of you, page after page, small print. You say to the dealer, you know, my mommy and daddy told me never to sign anything I didn't read. You got a chair here, I'd like to sit down. And the dealer looks at you like you're from Mars, you know, nobody's ever done this before. But he's a kind of bemused chap, and he gets you a chair, you pull out your magnifying glass and start going through all the fine print. There are things you don't like. You double the warranty here, you cross out a paragraph there, you eliminate the binding arbitration clause that strips you of your right to go to court if you have a dispute. And then you take it back to the dealer. And you say, dealer, you know, I've got this just where I want it. You're really great. Sign on the dotted line. What do you think would happen? We live in a corporate-dominated society where all we're left with is you sign on the dotted line, America. You sign it. Vendors tell you that. We had a little book once called A Action Manual for Lemon Owners, you know, cars. And in the back we had a prototype pro-consumer car purchasing agreement. And we told the people who bought the book, take it down when you buy a car, used car, new car. And just before the dealer whips out their contract, you whip out yours. Put it on the desk and say, see that GTO over there? Hey, I want it. Sign. Well, one guy did, the first letter we got back, he said, look, I did just what you said. I took it down to the dealer, whipped out the contract after I picked out my car, told him to sign, and he calls the police on him. You see what I mean? Where is the freedom of contract? It's you take it or leave it, and if you don't take it, you go across the street to a competitor. It's the same form contract, developed by the same corporate law firm. We're going to do a lot about this in the future. It's going to be really fun. You know, to me, the bigger the odds, the more I like it. When I took on General Motors as a young lawyer, I said, how can you take on General Motors, the biggest corporation in the world? I said, look, I got the right of human beings in this country on my side to buy cars that protect them in crashes with adequate brakes, handling systems, and crash protection. That's all I need to take on General Motors, because the bigger they are, the bigger they fall. Receptive Congress in the mid-60s, a fairly receptive Lyndon Baines Johnson White House to the proposals to enact motor vehicle safety legislation, and a press that actually thought it was a newsworthy topic, and they covered it every day as a news beat. We got the motor vehicle, highway, and auto safety bills through in 1996, and he regularly enforced. You know, some presidents didn't care about it, like Clinton or Gore. They're worse than Nixon and Reagan in terms of auto safety. They've completely defanged, and detoothed, and declawed, the Auto Safety Agency, turned it from an enforcement agency that would have stopped the Firestone Tire Ford Explorer tragedy into a consulting firm to the auto companies in Detroit. But he regularly enforced, this law has saved over 1 million American lives and millions of injuries prevented or reduced in severity, and driven the fatality rate from 5.6 fatalities for every 100 million vehicle miles traveled in 1966 to last year it was 1.6. From 5.6 to 1.7. And so when George W. Bush says he's against government regulation, you know what you ought to say to him? May you be saved by the airbag someday, or a seatbelt, or a padded dash panel, or a collapsible steering column. Government health and safety regulation works when you have law enforcement and law and order liberating the engineers and the scientists in these companies and getting these corporate executives, nitwits, off their back so they can give you a cleaner environment and a safer product that you find together. Let's talk about working people, the working poor, a phrase that Clinton and Gore and Bush never talk about. You notice how many times Al Gore and Clinton say they represent middle-class families? And I say to myself, wait a minute, isn't there anyone else they should represent? How about the underclass? How about the working people? How about 1 out of every 3 American workers that cannot earn a living wage even though they go to work every day, week after week? Someday, mark my word, the poor, the working poor in this country are going to be heard from. And if we don't address their problems and their grievances, it's not going to be pleasant because they are being subjected to brutal conditions in the workplace very often and to levels of income that in real purchasing power are less than what people like them earned in 1968, 1973, and 1979, before the economy doubled in real output per capita, and before all these fat cat corporation executives started making an average of $50,000 a day, not counting perks in the top 500 corporations. Someday the working poor are going to be heard from. Let me give you some examples here. Consider 47 million Americans who work every day earn less than $10 an hour. 10 million of them are at the $5.15 federal minimum wage. 70% of those are adults, not teenagers. And millions more don't earn much more. Now you start out with $6.60 an hour, like a 45-year-old mother of a single child told me a few weeks ago. She said that she has to travel 8 miles every day to Walmart. She had to buy a used car, insurance policy, repair, daycare, all before she got her munificent hourly rate of $6.60 an hour. There's no way anybody can live on that today. And if they go into deeper debt, they borrow from relatives, they go without. And this is what's going on here. This so-called booming economy is an apartheid economy. It's really terrific to the top 10%. And these people are adjusting by either having more members of the family work at dead-end, non-living wage paid jobs. And you know, we pay a price for that. There's no one left in the community. There's no one left with children. There's no one left with family. People are rushing longer and longer commutes. Why can't we have an economy where one breadwinner can earn enough for a middle-class standard of living? That's what I was trying to do. People are exhausted. They're coming home exhausted. They plump down in front of the TV set for just a little relief. And then it's up at 5 because you got to fight the traffic, right? You're going bumper to bumper, cars, trucks, vans, bumper to bumper, slower than what the horses were giving people decades ago. You should see them around LA and Washington, D.C. As far as the eye can see, we were in a traffic jam here, coming here, but that's why you ought to vote for that light rail. Have you ever seen a new car ad on television situated in congested traffic? See how they get in our minds? Have you ever seen people going to work in a sleek mass transit car on television? Snoozing, chatting with their friends, reading the paper. Nice, comfortable. Looking out the window where parallel highways chocked with trucks, vans, and cars. Of course not. I mean, let's face it. If you control people's expectation levels, you control them. And you don't have to have anything else. The situation in this country in terms of power is not George Orwell's 1984. It's Huxley's Brave New World. Read it, and you'll see. If we are allowed our expectation levels, now they're telling you on this light rail, they're saying, hey, you know, it's too expensive and too few people who use it. Well, first of all, how many people do you think use a car every morning? Huh? There are about 4 out of 5 seats in the car is empty. Do anybody say, look at this traffic, highway traffic system, 80% unused capacity. Everything is geared for the highway and motor vehicles. Shopping malls, this, that, the whole structure now has been bent because of the highway lobby's control over the last few generations. Listen, in 28 major metropolitan areas in the 1930s and 1940s, General Motors, Firestone, and Standard Oil of California conspired to set up a company to buy up the trolley systems, which they viewed as their competition, and to tear up the tracks, and then hurl their lobbying power to state legislatures and Congress to make the whole surface transportation a highway one. They were caught. The Justice Department impaneled a grand jury right after World War II. The grand jury indicted the 3 companies and a number of executives. The court convicted them in federal district court in Chicago for what some consider the economic crime of the century. Because every day people are going into bumper-to-bumper traffic, wasting time, consuming fuel, accidents, road rage, fatigue, and spending a lot of money when we could have spectacular, modern mass transit systems. Don't ever think of buses when you think of the elevated sky trains and all kinds of personalized mass transit that Northwestern University's Institute and others have developed. But you know what GM was fined for this economic crime of the century? $5,000. The damage was done, and it's continuing to this day. This is what happens when the corporations are sovereign and when the people are not. You've got a chance to get this metropolitan area on the pathway to not only light rail, but light rail, maybe something else will come along, and people will get used to it, and maybe they'll be much more supportive. But you've got the money already on your side, you know, it's been salted away. You get matching money from Washington, you're underway. Don't buy this propaganda about underutilized capacity. They've rigged the system so badly that not only do they take your money and pump it into their highway subsidies, but they make you think that if a mass transit system is only 30% full, that it's not economic. And you just say, what about your highway? What about your highway? How economic is that? How about all the external costs? How about all the empty seats? How about all the frustration and time? We got to change the expectation level in one area after another. Remember I said crime, violence, welfare, and regulation? When corporations tell you you got to sign on the dotted line, that's a private legislature. That is corporate regulation, reducing your negotiating power with them enormously. So that's corporate regulation. All those credit card rules, you can do this, that, you're responsible for everything, the company's responsible for nothing. So we ought to think of corporate regulation that regulates the quality of our air by blocking air pollution control, or the quality of our water, or the quality of our food by the pesticide industries who don't want organic agriculture, who don't want crop rotation, who don't want the discovery of old knowledge to keep your food clean, because they want to sell more chemicals and more chemicals and more chemicals. Executives, and we say, look, your engineers know how to do it, so that when the head hits the rearview mirror, it breaks away. The rearview mirror breaks away, not the head. Why don't you do it? They give you this cold, glassy stare, like, you want to tell us how to design our cars? And when you really press it, they say, you know, we're not a charitable organization. Now, if you could only see the crushed skulls on the color slides of the pathologists, and just multiply that thousands of times, and you will get a sense of what happens when we let these corporations be our masters instead of our servants. The coal miners in this country have lost more lives from coal miner pneumoconiosis in the mines, black lung disease is called, breathing the coal dust, and from mine shaft collapses, most of which was long ago preventable if the coal barons and the steel companies that owned the mines were a little more concerned about human life. More miners have lost their lives since 1890 than all the Americans killed in World War II. Over 400,000 miners. The coal mine industry was a mass production vehicle for widows and orphans. We often forget that because all we get is the razzle-dazzle Silicon Valley image of our economy. 200,000 people in this country were killed by asbestos contamination, starting back in the 20s and 30s in the shipyards, when the companies knew, and their internal documents showed, that they knew that it was a deadly ingestible in terms of mesothelioma and asbestosis disease. So we really need, I think, to get more information before us, because all we're confronted with is the blizzard of corporate propaganda, of advertisements of rosy pictures. We don't see the other America, and a lot of the other America is us. It's not just the other America, the 1/3 of the workers who can't earn a living, even though they work every day because of a non-living wage. I want to just point out, to show how we have to grow up civic more instead of corporate. Remember I said crime, violence, welfare, regulation. See, we grow up corporate, we don't think of corporate crime, corporate regulation, corporate violence, corporate welfare. We think of the images we see on the evening news, on the late evening news. And when we look at the late evening news, do we ever ask ourselves, is this really what's going on in Austin, Texas? Or in Dallas, Texas? Or Miami, Florida? Or New York City? The late evening news is composed of 30 minutes. 9 minutes are ads. 3 minutes start out usually with street crime, very superficially covered. There's about 4 minutes of sports, 4 minutes of weather, a couple serious stories, the prescribed animal story, a story about the New England Journal of Medicine finding, and 1 minute of contrived, totally extemporaneous chit-chat between the anchors. The obsession of these stations with weather. They give it to you in 3 stages. 2 minutes in, they say, guess what we've got in store for you in the weekend? Stay tuned. Meteorologist Jacques Bodunga is going to come on. They have a meteorologist every day. They seem to have a different meteorologist, Doppler radar. They show the storm front coming down from Alaska, over the Cascades, the Rocky Mountains, heading toward Texas. And, you know, they're depressed when it's good weather. They get very depressed, these meteorologists. But what is really striking is how they try to fill up the time when there are all kinds of something's going on in your city, you can't get on the late evening news. You work hard, you try to improve your neighborhood, you find a good school that works, and you can't get on. Once they get the front that's coming 5,000 miles away, you know, then they show you all the suburbs around the city on a map. And they say, well, and they're about 2 miles apart. For instance, 61 degrees here, 63 degrees there, 59 degrees. Then they want to use up more time, saying 20 years ago it was 74 degrees here, 62 degrees there. Now, does it ever occur to us that this is our property that they're using? We own the public airways. We have They are more and more owned by giant conglomerates, 7 major conglomerates, General Electric, Disney, Time Warner, Rupert Murdoch chain, etc. Whereas 5 years ago, no company could own by law more than 12 radio stations. Now, thanks to Clinton's Telecommunication Act of 1996, one company owns 800 radio stations. And they're giving you standardized, homogenized, commercialized patent. And they're laying off reporters, they're laying off camera crews in a paroxysm of profit maximization greed. Now, we are the landlords, they're the tenants. What do tenants do in America? They pay rent. These radio and TV stations haven't paid a dime in rent since 1927 when the first radio law was passed. They've had over 70 years of a free ride using our assets. And so why don't we look at it this way? No democracy worthy of its salt can rely so heavily on the commercial media. We need our own radio stations, our own TV stations. We get it by charging them rent and using that money to thoroughly fund our own media, our own creativity, the dynamics, and the civic spirit of our country as a voice. We can communicate with one another. We don't have to go through two-spaced advertisement and all the rest of the commercialized restraint that's on the commercial media. We wouldn't even know how to begin. We are so deprived of our own fantastic media that is ours. We need an audience TV network funded and controlled by the audience and funded also by charges to these radio and TV stations that are beginning a free ride, a form of corporate welfare, all by themselves. When you have media like that, they don't even highlight the successful companies who put the lie to the big companies, who say that they can't clean up pollution, or they can't do this. The big companies are always, no, we can't do this, we can't do that. Technology's not here, it's too expensive. No. They've been saying no to the abolition movement against slavery, the women's right to vote, the trade union movement, the farmer progressive. Every time they say no, and they lose to the people, America is better as a result. We're 270 million strong in this country. Do you have any idea of how much creativity is getting no voice, no visibility? How many good ideas, no voice, no visibility, no metabolism, no chance to have a chance to prevent? We don't even look at it that way anymore because our expectation levels are down. We're told you don't like the program, click another program. You don't like any of it, click off. That's free. Instead of saying, I don't want to click off. I want some of that time back for the American people so they can do their own programming and their own reporting and develop a community intelligence that reflects their priorities and their dreams. These corporations have got us on our knees. Have you ever heard of the Interface Corporation in Atlanta, Georgia? This corporation has a zero pollution goal and a maximum recycling goal. It's the second largest commercial carbon and tile manufacturer in the country. 1994, Ray Anderson, the CEO, said, I don't believe all this stuff that pollution control is not good for the bottom line. I'm going full out. I'm going full out to reduce my costs by reducing my waste, which is what pollution is, which is lack of recycling is. And he's doing it year by year in order to reduce his costs and respect, as he say, the earth. He wants to respect the earth and reduce the cost. Do you see Ray Anderson, the Interface Corporation, ever highly publicized like every little blink of Bill Gates is? You see how the press does not reflect sufficiently the models of superior performance, whether they're in the inner city school that's working beautifully, or whether it's the credit union that's working beautifully, or whether it's the housing development that's working in the public transit. That's what we got to get rid of. We've got to put people first with power. Power puts people first. Some of you here may wonder, why is this Green Party advancing extreme views? Let me just give you two very interesting responses to that skepticism. Here is the September 11 issue of Business Week magazine. You couldn't get a more mainstream magazine. It's full of big corporate ads. The title is Too Much Corporate Power? And inside, in page after page of devastating detail about corporate abuses of human beings, of politics, of workers, of the environment, of the consumer. Business Week magazine answers that question. Yes, yes, yes. And in the editorial at the end states unequivocally, quote, corporations should get out of politics, end quote. In a poll inside the magazine, 72% of the American people answered yes to the question. The corporations have too much power over all aspects of your life. Can you imagine Business Week magazine is way more progressive than the Democratic and Republican parties. You couldn't get out of the even to ask this question. Never mind to answer it. They wouldn't even say, is there too much corporate power? Now, here's where the extremist label should be attached. It is extremism for corporations to corrupt, buy, rent our elections and distort our governmental processes for their own profit and hijack our democracy for their own profit. It is not extremism for the Green Party to mount a political movement to put an end to this and to have clean money elections with full public financing of public elections. To strip us of our local, state, and national sovereignty and siphon it off to autocratic systems of international governance called the World Trade Organization and NAFTA, who we did not appoint, we did not elect, and who we are excluded from in your own internal deliberation as we subordinate our priorities to the dictates of international commerce. It is not extremism to pull out of the WTO and NAFTA and renegotiate international trade agreements to pull standards up for people in the world, not pull standards down. It's extremism to take hundreds of billions of your consumer dollars every year by fraud, deception, shoddy merchandise, tricky fine print. It is not extremism to apply law and order and full prosecutorial power against corporate crime, fraud, and abuse. Last night I was in St. Louis, unfortunately not on the debate. Had I been on the debate, had I been on those three presidential debates, it would have been a three-way race. Just like Jesse Ventura was at 8%, he gets on the debates, three-way race, and he wins. A month later, governor of Minnesota. I sauntered over to Washington University, where the debate was being held. I had an invitation from the student television station on the campus. They provided me with credentials, around your neck, square, and I go into the entrance and I'm met by the police again. This is the way I was met in Boston 2 weeks earlier when I had a ticket to go and watch the debate in an adjoining auditorium and give Fox News an interview after the debate in the trailer on the premises. And I was met by the representative of the debate commission who announced that even if I had a ticket, I was not invited in, and I had to leave, and he had 3 state troopers around me who said if I didn't leave, I would be arrested. So, now it's twice now. They have kept me out of essentially premises I have every right to be in. Now, let me tell you something. They threw out the wrong guy this time. District Court in Boston. After the election, this debate commission is just a private company created 12 years ago by the Republican Democratic Party, funded by Anheuser-Busch, tobacco money, auto money, Sarah Lee, 3Com, and they have the key to tens of millions of American significant third-party candidates going to get on the 3 debates. It's the only way you can reach 10 voters, given the reduced stature and interest in elections by the mass media. You can campaign in every state, as I have, for 50 years. Wouldn't reach the audiences that Bush and Gore reached on those debates. So after the election, in addition to the lawsuit, and I told the head of security for Washington University, as you go back tomorrow, you talk to the president of the university, and you mull over you're being given an illegal political order to exclude me, because I had 2 of my associates with exactly the same credentials. They went right through twice. They came out, they went through twice. They kept me out, you see. So we're going to form, after the election, a broad-based, and I hope you'll support it, a broad-based People's Debate Commission to smash. John McCain's famous statement earlier this year that he went around the country, and I want to read it to you. He said, quote, American cynicism about government is born of many factors, but none greater than our defense, he's talking about the politicians, defense of a campaign finance system that is little more than an elaborate influence peddling scheme in which both parties conspire to stay in office by selling the country to the highest bidder, end quote. And we hope to get those John McCain voters, and those Ross Perot voters, and those Bill Bradley voters, and their Jesse Ventura voters on November 7th, because we're the only party. The joy and justice of politics should be connected to one another, because justice is really a form of pursuing happiness. When you achieve justice, you have a gratification you simply cannot put in words or put numbers on. The pursuit of justice is a precondition to the pursuit of happiness. And what we need to recognize is there are many people in our country, although they live in a country with good civil rights laws, they are not enforced evenly. And the criminal injustice and the racial profiling and the mandatory sentencing and all the rest is really disgraceful. The other day, a fellow stole a bicycle in California. It's 3 strikes and you're out. He got life in jail. He had had 2 prior convictions, none of them particularly violent. But 3 strikes, 3 felonies, you're out. You know, you think you'll ever see the day when a corporate executive stands before a judge and the judge says, 3 strikes and you're out. You're going to jail for life. There was a head of a sausage plant in California a few weeks ago. He went wild and he shot and killed 2 federal meat inspectors and a state meat inspector in broad daylight with witnesses. He's going to get himself a nice, smart lawyer. You think he's going to go to the chair? He won't go to the chair. He's not only got a smart lawyer, he's white. I mean, this kind of racial discrimination is vicious. The other day, a doctor was convicted in Long Island. He admitted of aggressively injecting lethal chemicals into 3 of his patients in whose care they were entrusted. And he said he got a thrill out of it. And there are about 3 dozen other deaths that he's suspected in causing. I mean, they're aggressive. Just, you know, like and he pleaded guilty. And he admitted it. And he got life in jail. Well, he had a smart lawyer who knew how to plead him and knew how to maneuver the system. And he's white. And he's wealthy. And he got off. When you have the death penalty applied in this kind of discriminatory fashion against poor people, people of color, who are given the dregs of the legal profession, people out of the way, defend them. We're the only Western country now that has a death penalty, and most states do, but quite a few states don't. We have the highest homicide rate per capita in the Western world. We're the only country that has a death penalty. No study has ever shown anything that the death penalty does not deter. You had George Bush say repeatedly, the only reason he does it is because it deters. It deters. No one ever asked Jim Laird or Al Gore, because Al Gore's the death penalty too, saying, please, any studies to show it deters? And how about the corporate death penalty, Governor Bush? What about a criminal corporation that's in the citizens holding them charged? And throwing it into a trustee for their money.
Them saying they believe it deters is the same as big tobacco saying that nicotine is not addictive.
Yes, it's the same thing. The same thing. On our website, votenader.com, you got opportunities to volunteer quickly in the next 3 weeks. Let's put a moratorium on small talk with friends, co-workers, relatives, neighbors, and let's generate some real heavy, exciting, progressive political talk to get the vote out on November 7th. If you need reasons to persuade your doubting friends or relatives or co-workers, they're going to be on the website, votenader.com. And I'm sure those of you here who have been active don't need any reasons. You can give 1,000 examples all by yourself. But what is important to emphasize is this. The 2 parties matter less and less in Washington because there's a permanent corporate government. That's what makes them more one party. It doesn't matter. Remember this. If you ask a frightened liberal Democrat who says to you, the Supreme Court, that's the difference between the 2 parties. You say, well, who are the 2 worst justices in your mind? And they're likely to say Scalia and Thomas. Well, then you say, do you know what Scalia was confirmed by in the U.S. Senate? 98-0, with every Democratic senator voting for him, including Al Gore. Do you know what Thomas was confirmed by? 52-48, with 11 Democratic senators carrying him over into the win column Senate that had majority Democrats in control. You got any other clairvoyance? How bad the Republicans are in the Congress, you can heartily agree and say, who gave them the Congress? Who was so shorn of their own self-respect as a party? Who was so indentured to the same fat cats that the Republicans are, that they allowed people like Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott to take over the Congress in 3 straight elections? In other words, they don't come with clean hands. The Democrats do not come with clean hands. The Democrats cater to their right wing because they know their right wing can vote Republican. They turn their back on the soul of their party, the Progressive Democrats, because they know the Progressive Democrats until this year have had nowhere to go other than to vote for a corporatist Democratic Party because the Republicans are worse. We got news for the Progressive Democrats. They got a place to go on November 7th. This is what political rallies are supposed to be about, huh? Exciting, music, culture, good political speeches, well documented. That's what it's all about. You know, everything else is short attention span, huh? They get you on the TV, Mr. Nader, what are your plans for the country? How much do I have? 7 seconds, maybe 8. See, I'm in training now. I know when I'm asked a question by a TV news reporter, I'm saying to myself, I got to get this answer in 7 seconds or less, preferably 5, because sometimes they'll cut off part of the sentence in the interest of time. But now I'm one step ahead of them. I've been training for the next decade of abbreviated television news responses. I'm moving from the sound bite to the sound bark. You know what the sound bark is? The sound bark is, what do you think of the Federal Reserve's latest interest rate hike, Mr. Nader? That's it. You can't, how do you satire? Will you tell me how to satire? That's why we need our own media. Now, the question is, the abolitionists wanted it badly, and they fought for it. The women's suffragists wanted it, they fought for it. The workers for trade unions and the industries and the brutalized mines wanted it, fought for it, got it. How much do we want to advance justice in this country? Will we be looked on by future generations who say, well, there they go. That was the last generation that had to give up so little in order to achieve so much. Can you imagine what is going to happen to this planet if we don't mount a major assault on global infectious diseases that are coming this way after killing millions every year in other continents, coming this way in drug-resistant strains like West Nile virus and tuberculosis and malaria? Can you imagine what's going to happen in a few decades when global warming reaches even higher heights and the glaciers are melting and the climate is changing and ozone holes are coming over North America or Central America? Can you imagine how much we're going to have to sacrifice? Can you imagine how much your children and grandchildren are going to have to sacrifice if we don't put a stop to the madness of nuclear proliferation as the #1 nuclear arms manufacturer in the world? We should take the lead for global abolition with all other countries of nuclear power, nuclear weapons. What's going to happen if we don't do something about mass poverty and illiteracy in this world? Poverty beyond your wildest imaginations. Poverty that is so mind-numbing that we can say today, in spite of all scientific advances, in spite of all medical advances, more people, human beings in this world of ours died from malaria and tuberculosis last year than any year in history. And that's just 2 diseases. The deserts are expanding. The soil erosion is expanding. And along comes the biotech companies who say, we are going to plan your genetic future, planet Earth. we're going to convert your genetic inheritance into 17-year monopoly patents held by Monsanto and Novartis. And we are going to plan your genetic future. Well, you see, all this is coming. All this is coming. You don't see it on Jerry Springer, Sally Jesse Raphael, Howard Stern, the late evening news. The first step of justice is to recognize reality. Sweep aside the rosy, sugar-coated slogans and propaganda. The way we deal with problems in this country at our best in our history is we recognize reality, and we went to work to deal with it. And this is what we have to do in increasing the estimate of our own significance and our own self. It really comes down to what you think of yourself as a citizen, as a mover, as a shaper with other citizens to build justice in this world of ours, and to start it with a new progressive political movement. That's really what it comes down to. We can agree on all these agendas, but if we all drift away and forget about it, think of it like it's a great memory and a great rally the way it is tonight in Austin, Texas, we can just make it a memory, or we can make it an engine of metabolism to raise our sights and our expectation levels and realize that with the smallest amount of human civic energy coordinated with a progressive, humane, practical agenda, we can assure that our democracy will be stronger, deeper rooted, and able to reassert the sovereignty of the people and their priorities, human need over corporate greed, in a short time, and don't take that long. Simple definitions. Just simple definitions. They really stick in my mind. 2,040 years ago, Cicero defined freedom this way, quote, "Freedom is participation in power," end quote. Let's think about that. How many people have freedom in this country by that definition? If you don't have freedom to participate in power and shape the democracy and confront injustice with something more than just truth, but also power, are you really free? And if you have participation in power through a new progressive political party, with it to a growing civic movement and a political progressive movement, then you will be able to pursue justice, address your grievances, develop an ambit of tranquility around your lives, so you're not in a frantic rush where everything is a soundbite, everything is a rush, everything is a cell phone ring, everything is a long commute, and pretty soon the drastic pressure of economics on people desperately trying to make ends meet consumes their entire life. So the pursuit of justice is preceded by the freedom to participate in power. And then there's the last little saying by the ancient Chinese proverb, quote, "To know and not to act is not to know," end quote. We know. We know what's wrong in this country. Many of us know in great detail what's wrong in this country. But if we don't act on it, do we really know? It was Justice Louis Brandeis in the Supreme Court in 1941 who summed up the central contention of politics, which is the concentration or distribution of power in a society between the haves and the have-nots. He said, and I quote him, "We can have a democratic society, or we can have the concentration of great wealth in the hands of the few. We cannot have both," end quote. Let's go forward to November 7th.